is that when we live with commitment phobia, we think that we are keeping our options open. We think that if we commit to one person or one thing, we're losing something. But I'm here to tell you, if you don't make a commitment, you stand to forfeit some things as well. Not failing or failing to make a commitment also carries some consequences. I want to talk about those consequences. For those of us who live every day and got people still dangling on the string with commitment phobia. Because for whatever reason, we can't make up our mind on any one thing or any one person. In the first place, a failure to commit openly to what we know in our hearts to be true indicates that we have not yet overcome our fears in life. Matthew chapter 10, Jesus addresses not new converts, but he addresses his 12 disciples. He's not addressing individuals who are meeting him for the first time. Jesus is talking to disciples who have been walking and talking and listening and learning from him for some time. Jesus says to his disciples, now let me be clear with you. If you fail to acknowledge me before others, if you fail to make your commitment to me open and public before your brothers and your sisters, let me be clear. I will fail to acknowledge you before God, the mother, father, sister, brother in heaven. The disciples had to make a decision. They had already accepted Jesus in their hearts, personally, in their hearts. They had already seen the light in their minds, in their spirits. They had already affirmed Jesus as their Lord and Savior, but they were at this particular juncture in their life afraid to make their commitment to Christ public. They were living with what we call a closeted Christianity. A faith behind closed doors. What were they afraid of? Number one, they were afraid of going against the grain of their established religious order. They were afraid that if they made their commitment to Jesus Christ public, that they would have to face the wrath of the religious rulers who did not give their sanction to Jesus nor his ministry. They were afraid of irritating religious people in high places. They were afraid that if they aligned themselves publicly with the ministry of Jesus, that they would face social ostracism. Because there's nothing like having to explain what you're doing to people who are locked in traditional mindsets. Nothing like explaining how you are a part of a progressive moving church that does not tolerate LGBT people, but affirms LGBT people as children of the Most High God. When you talk to people who have been indoctrinated in their religious traditions. And people have a way of letting you know. We ain't never heard that before. Not here in D.C., maybe in Georgia. So they got a way of saying things to you and even hurting your children's feelings. And letting them know, we don't know what they're doing because that ain't what we've been taught. My grandmama didn't teach me that. The pastor that died 6 years ago didn't teach me that. The church I grew up in Tata, Georgia didn't teach me that. And we don't know where this newfangled stuff came from. And the disciples were in that kind of situation. They had to actually go and explain to their parents, mind you, the disciples, all in their 20s, having to make a decision as to whether or not they would cast their lot publicly with this new Messiah, who, by the way, did not have the endorsement or the sanction of religious order. Jesus, who stood outside of the rubric of the status quo. They having to go and explain to their parents publicly how it is that they are not in temple. They are out on the mountain listening to Jesus proclaim the beatitudes. How do you explain that? And you can hear their parents say, now listen, don't mess yourself up. Because now we know the high priest, we know him. And we know the Pharisees and the Sadducees, we know them. But this itinerant upstart preacher from Galilee, we don't know nothing about that. And you got your whole career ahead of you. Don't mess yourself up by casting your lot with this unknown Messiah. He's obviously not even welcome nor affirmed by the religious order. And it was the fear of being ostracized that had the disciples confessing their commitment to Jesus in private, but publicly being mum, publicly failing to acknowledge it. Personally, they were Jesus. Jesus, we won't go all the way. Jesus, we will. But publicly, fear. Do I need to tell you how many people live with fear every day? Do I need to tell you how many people allow the fear of public opinion to determine how they live, who they associate with publicly? That's why many people have confessions and commitments that they keep in the closet. We have friends that we don't want our other friends to know about. Well, you might as well admit it. All of your friends you don't want to bring home. Everybody you associate with, you don't want on your Facebook page. We have some friends that we want everybody to know that we know, and other friends we want to keep in the closet out of fear of what people might think about me. What they would think about me if they knew I associated with you. We have revelations that we are afraid to reveal in public. Do you know how many dreams and visions God has given people that they never even express publicly because they are afraid that people won't understand the vision that God has given you? You know, to have vision is to see something that other folk can't see yet anyway. That's what vision means. It's when God shows you something that others don't even see yet. And a whole lot of us never move on dreams, never move on vision. As a matter of fact, we got stuff that we haven't started this year that we should have gotten done last year. But we don't want to move on a vision or a dream unless it meets public approval or unless a committee of friends give their endorsement. We don't understand that God doesn't need a committee. All God needs is you. Come on. With some courage to publicly acknowledge your convictions. We have commitments that we won't reveal. We have commitments that we fail to codify and to notarize. We have people that we lay down with at night and then don't want to be seen with in the daylight. But I hear Jesus say, if your faith in me cannot be made public, it's not real. I hear Jesus say, if you are going to be my disciple, you are going to have to overcome your fear, come out of the closet, and proclaim your faith to the whole wide world. Jesus said, now listen, I want to be clear with you. If you are ashamed of me before your friends, I will be ashamed of you before God in heaven. You believe in somebody or something, you ought to be willing to stand on it. This is not the time for closeted faith. This is not the time for quiet testimony. This is not the time to light a candle and then hide it under a bushel. If you believe in somebody or something, you ought to be able to stand on it, fight for it, tell the world about it, even if folks don't see it. If you know God is real, you ought to say so. I heard the Apostle Paul say, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, because it is the power of God unto salvation, not to some, but to everyone that believeth. And when Paul made that statement, he made that statement in a context where people had more devotion to the laws of Moses than they did to the gospel of Christ. They were more locked up in law than they were in love. They were more concerned about the Levitical codes than they were about amazing grace. Paul says, but I'm ashamed of the gospel. See, you can sing that if everybody agrees with you in the context. But when you have to say that, when you have to make a statement that you know is against the thinking and the mentality of those around you, that's when you got to go to the land of Oz and get yourself some courage. And a whole lot of folks ain't got no courage. I didn't say they didn't have long eyelashes. I said they don't have any courage. Don't have any ability to stand on principle. Don't have the capacity to stand up for their own convictions. You know God is real, you got to say so. Even if you believe in something that others don't agree with, you've got to have the ability to go with what you know and to believe God anyhow. This is not the time for private revelation. That will not help us to move the public forward in their understanding. This is not the time for closeted faith. This is not the time for closeted commitments. If we're going to keep our churches and our colleges open, you can't make a private, personal, closeted commitment to your college and expect your college to stay open. I was at one of my class reunions a few years ago up in Connecticut, and I was out on the lawn having a good time, just like I was back in college, and I was with my frat brothers, and we were just having a grand old time talking about college life, and some sisters we knew came by. We just had a picnic outside, and one of the professors that taught me when I was in college came and said, "Y'all having a great time?" We said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, if y'all like this college so much, y'all ought to write some checks to keep the college open." Made us feel so bad we had to shut the picnic down and go get our checkbooks and make a contribution to our alma mater. I'm trying to tell you, all this good feeling on the inside ain't gonna help nothing. Yes. Feeling good about your church, feeling good about your college ain't gonna help the doors stay open. You got to translate your personal devotion into some public dollars and into some public commitment in order to keep the doors open. You've been benefited and blessed by your church, by an institution that's helped you, then you ought to prove it by supporting it publicly. I tell people, black folk in Georgia, we're not going to keep Barack Obama in office after 2012 just by feeling good about him and Michelle personally. Most black folk I know like them personally, but is your personal liking going to translate into a public vote? Come on now. That's the reason why the Congress is the way it is now. Because too many of us laid out, but we feel good about President Obama. But we don't let the Congress be taken over by conservatives. Because we don't translate how we feel personally into some kind of public endorsement. Yes. Happens with your church. This is not the time for closet commitments. It's not the time to be trying to love somebody on the down low. This is not the time for that. I don't know if there ever was a time for that. You know, Luther Vandross says, I know some of y'all too young about Luther Vandross. He said, I didn't know that you wanted me for your secret love. I didn't know that you wanted this secret love. He just sang that thing. But then he said, but I should have known. Because I can't meet you in D.C. It's always got to be in Virginia. Always Virginia. After 6. On weekends only. I think it was Beyonce who said, if you like it, then you should have put a ring on it. In other words, you should have made a commitment to it. Because this is not the time for these down low closeted relationships. Not the time to be keeping somebody undercover. Deep undercover. And then afraid to be seen with them in the daylight. Not the time to be feeling good or feeling committed to something on the down low in private and then in public. Jesus said, I want to be clear with you. If you are ashamed of me before your friends and your family, I will be ashamed of you. Commitment phobia means that we have not overcome our fear.